A strange rule required me to sign blank documents before every birthday celebration. Years later, those signatures were used to shift the entire inheritance. I was 12 the first time my parents told me it was just part of our family tradition. They handed me a stack of papers on the morning of my birthday. No explanations, no context, just a pen and my father's calm voice telling me to trust him. He said it was for future protection. My mother stood beside him smiling too hard like she was trying to convince herself more than me. The papers were blank except for signature lines at the bottom. I remember asking what I was signing. My father laughed and said, "Nothing important today, everything important later." That sentence should have warned me, but I was 12 and birthdays meant cake, not suspicion, so I signed. And that became the rule every birthday, every year, same blank documents, same vague reassurance, same uneasy feeling I learned to bury. By the time I was 16, I stopped asking questions out loud, but I never stopped wondering. The documents were always slightly different in thickness, sometimes legal paper, sometimes just stapled sheets. Once I noticed a faint watermark from a law firm I didn't recognize. When I asked my mother about it, she smiled too quickly. She said, "Your father likes to stay organized." That didn't explain anything. It only made it worse, because nothing about my father was disorganized. He was a meticulous accountant. Numbers were his language, control was his personality, and I was starting to understand that birthdays were not about me in this house. At 18, I tried refusing. It was the first time I pushed back. I said I wanted to read what I was signing. The room went silent in a way that felt physically heavy. My father didn't raise his voice. That was the scariest part. He just placed the papers back on the table and said, "Then you don't get your birthday dinner." My mother looked down at her hands. She didn't defend me. She never did when he sounded like that. I signed again that year, but something inside me shifted. I started noticing patterns I had ignored before. The documents always came from the same leather folder. The same folder my father locked in his office drawer, a drawer I was never allowed to open. When I turned 21, I moved out. I told myself distance would erase the unease. It didn't. Instead, it made it sharper, because every birthday, without fail, a courier arrived at my apartment. Always the same company, always a neutral envelope. Inside were new documents and a prepaid return envelope, no explanation, just my father's neat signature at the bottom of the instruction letter. He wrote, "Family tradition continues." I hated how those words still made me comply. I signed out of habit, not trust, habit. That was worse. The first real crack appeared when my grandmother died. She had always been the quiet center of the family, the only one who ever looked at me with something like concern instead of expectation. At her funeral, I noticed my father was calm in a way that didn't match grief. He was prepared, like he had already calculated the emotional cost. After the burial, he told me not to worry about the inheritance. He said, "Everything is already structured." I asked what he meant. He just patted my shoulder and said, "You'll understand one day." That phrase again, one day. It always meant never now. A month later, I received a letter from a law firm I had never heard of. It informed me that I had been listed in preliminary estate documentation. I didn't understand what that meant, so I ignored it. But then my cousin called me. She sounded shaken. She said she had been removed from something called the primary beneficiary designation. She asked if I knew anything about it. I didn't, but something in my stomach tightened, because I suddenly remembered all those blank documents, all those signatures, all those years. I went back home for the first time in 2 years. My father greeted me like nothing had changed, like I was still a child arriving for cake. The leather folder was on the table before I even sat down. That detail made my skin crawl. He hadn't even pretended anymore. He just pushed the papers toward me. I didn't sign them. Instead, I asked him what they were. He sighed like I was being difficult. He said, "Legal continuity documents." My mother added softly, "It keeps everything smooth when things change." That word smooth felt rehearsed, like they had practiced it. I told them I wanted to see all previous documents. My father's expression finally changed. Not anger, not fear, annoyance, like I was interrupting a system he had already perfected. He said, "That's not necessary." I asked why I had been signing them since I was 12. He replied, "Because you're part of the structure." That sentence didn't make sense, but it felt like the truth of something I didn't want to understand. I left without signing that year. It was the first time I broke the pattern, and it felt like stepping off a moving train. Everything in my life started to wobble after that. Emails from lawyers increased. Family messages became colder. My cousin stopped talking to me entirely. Then came the call that changed everything. A law firm requested my presence for estate clarification. They said my signature had been listed across multiple binding documents. They said I was a key structuring beneficiary. I didn't even understand the phrase, but I went. Because something had already gone too far to ignore. The office was too quiet, too clean. The lawyer didn't smile. He laid out documents in front of me like pieces of a puzzle. And then he said something that made my hands go cold. He said, "You have been authorizing changes to your family's inheritance structure for years." I laughed because it sounded impossible. He didn't laugh back. Instead, he slid the first document toward me. My signature, age 12. Then another, age 13, 14, 15, every year, every birthday, each one legally binding, each one slightly different in language, but all connected. I felt sick reading them because they weren't harmless. They were amendments, power transfers, clauses redirecting control of assets. At first minor, then progressively larger, and always routed through something labeled minor consent authorization. My childhood signature had been used as a legal anchor. I asked how that was even possible. The lawyer hesitated before answering. Then he said they were notarized under parental guardianship consent. My father had signed as my legal guardian every time, so my consent was layered on top of his authority. It created something enforceable, something irreversible. I felt like the room tilted because I suddenly understood why he never let me read them, why he never explained, why birthdays mattered. They weren't tradition. They were timestamps, legally strategic moments when my age changed and my consent gained new weight. I left the office shaking. My phone was already ringing when I stepped outside. My father, I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. His voice was calm, too calm. He said, "Don't let lawyers confuse you. Everything has always been for your benefit." That word again, benefit, but I wasn't feeling benefited. I was feeling used. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about every birthday cake I ever ate. Every smile, every signature, every lie wrapped in celebration. Then I noticed something I had missed for years. The documents always arrived before midnight, always technically on my birthday, always legally precise. I started digging through old emails, old boxes, old memories I had ignored, and I found something buried in a folder named Family Archive. A scanned document from when I was 11. It was a draft, not yet signed, but titled Future Beneficiary Control Framework. My name was already on it. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone, because that meant this wasn't improvisation. It was planned, long before I ever held a pen. I went back to the lawyer with everything I found. He looked uncomfortable for the first time. He said I needed to understand something important. He said, "Your father didn't create the structure alone." That stopped me. I asked who did. He hesitated again, then said, "Your grandmother." That didn't make sense. My grandmother had been gentle, soft-spoken. She hated conflict. But the lawyer opened another file, and there it was, her signature, co-signing early versions of the framework, her handwriting steady and precise. I felt like the ground under me cracked open. Suddenly, every memory shifted meaning. Her silence at family dinners, her long conversations with my father in private, her insistence that I trust the family system. It wasn't comfort, it was instruction, but the lawyer wasn't done, he added. She later attempted to revoke parts of it. I looked up sharply. He continued, "That's when the structure became irreversible." I asked what that meant. He slid one final document across the table, a court filing I had never seen. My grandmother's attempted amendment, rejected, countersigned by my father, and my signature already attached as a dependent beneficiary anchor. I felt something inside me go completely still, because I realized I wasn't just part of the inheritance. I was the mechanism that controlled it, without me knowing, without me understanding. Every birthday signature had been used to gradually shift control of assets across branches of the family, quietly, legally, systematically. I asked the lawyer who currently controlled everything. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Technically, you do." I laughed again, but it came out broken because I didn't feel like I controlled anything. He explained that the final clause activates fully when the original signer reaches 25 years of uninterrupted compliance. I was 24, next birthday would finalize the structure. I felt like I couldn't breathe, because suddenly every birthday wasn't just a memory, it was a countdown. I confronted my father that night. He didn't deny anything. He didn't even look surprised. He just said, "You were always the safest choice." I asked what that meant. He said, "Everyone else is impulsive. You followed instructions." That was when I understood the real horror. It wasn't manipulation for greed alone. It was trust and obedience. My mother finally spoke up. She said softly, "We protected you from the pressure of choosing." But I realized then that not choosing was the choice they made for me. I asked him if my grandmother knew everything. He nodded. He said, "She built the system. I refined it." Then he added, "She regretted it too late." That line stayed with me because regret doesn't undo legal structures. It only exposes them. I left that night without speaking, but I couldn't escape the truth anymore. Every birthday signature had been a vote I didn't know I was casting. Every document had shifted control silently between branches of the family estate, and I had unknowingly been the pivot point. I spent months trying to reverse it. Lawyers said it was nearly impossible. The structure was designed to resist emotional interference. That phrase made me sick, because it meant they had planned for someone like me to object eventually. Then I discovered something else, a hidden clause buried in the earliest draft. A clause requiring informed acknowledgement of final activation. which meant I had to understand everything before the inheritance finalized, which meant I still had one birthday left. That realization changed everything, because suddenly the system wasn't closed, it was waiting. I stopped answering my father's calls, but he sent one final message. He said, "Don't fight it. It was always meant to stabilize the family." But I couldn't unsee what I had seen. Stabilize wasn't protect, it was control. As my 25th birthday approached, I realized something even worse. Every relative had begun acting differently around me, more attentive, more cautious, like I was already something powerful, something they needed to manage carefully. My cousin finally contacted me again. She admitted she had been wrong about me. She said, "I thought you were replacing me, but you're not. You're replacing all of us." That was the moment I understood the final truth was not about money. It was about consolidation. One person legally anchoring everything through years of accumulated consent, and I had been trained since childhood to comply without question. The night before my birthday, I sat alone with the final document. It was already filled out. All that remained was acknowledgement, one signature, one final confirmation. I stared at the pen for a long time, and I realized something terrifying. I didn't know if refusing would free me or destroy everything, because the system didn't just depend on me. It depended on the belief that I would always sign. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what I would do next.